people who might be eligible under the Americans with Disabilities Act to get some mental health treatment. And gentlemen, going to be going over McStupid, mccainisthroughx's autistic obsession with the Disability Rights Treaty, as she does with a lot of videos. She did 3 on this, and they were all cut and paste. She did not put anything in her own words, and as I'll go over later, all she did was regurgitate pre-canned ham talking points. You'll have to forgive me. I'll be clicking back and forth through screenshots here. She's got 3 videos up, and reading these, here's one of her arguments. The GOP is a pack of sore losers who think that after losing an election on, she said very level, but she meant every level, presidency, Senate, and House, they can dictate policy. Well, as I put in the screenshot, there are some pushbacks to that. You do realize that's a double-edged sword, McStupid. So that's one of the talking points that she had in there. Another talking point is that it doesn't cost a single cent, which I will demonstrate is 99% not true. It's going to cost us a lot. I can almost guarantee that. I guarantee that as much as McStupid doesn't pay taxes. This is going to cost us a bundle. Another talking point, uses the U.S. Disability Act as a standard for our whole, she meant world, should not discriminate against the disabled. That begs the question, if it doesn't change U.S. law one iota, what's the point in passing it? We can't force another nation to ratify. Now, McStupid might push back at this and say, well, we're leading by example. Well, didn't we already lead by example with the Americans with Disabilities Act passed under President George Herbert Walker Bush, his Democrat Congress, and signed by him? Didn't we already lead by example? We can't force other nations to ratify. They use a lot of ad populum appeals. By God, even Russia and China have ratified it. We got to ratify it. If Russia and China, we need to follow them. Except when, has Iran ratified it yet, McStupid? Since I already called you out on your flip-flopping, they were our friend and their enemy, but that's another item. So let's get to some sound bites here from McStupid's 3 cut and paste videos that she cut and pasted off of a Google search or from somewhere off the internet, wherever, and she cut and pasted them and plunked them down as her material, which doesn't take much talent. Doesn't take much talent at all to just do a bunch of cut and paste. So unless you're like Harold Coe, McStupid, where you want to use international law as a strong arm and allow a globalist entity, a non-U.S. entity, to dictate policy for us, I will demonstrate that it will cost us a lot and it will change U.S. law. But let's go to McStupid's first soundbite, a cut and paste segment from Lawrence O'Donnell. At least I think that's who it was, some pencil neck geek.
A day of shame in the United States Senate. This was such a day of shame and sadness. John Kerry, in his role as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, was leading the Senate as the floor manager of a treaty. On the other side of the aisle, the senior Republican on the Foreign Relations Committee rose not in opposition but in support of that same treaty. Richard Lugar and John Kerry got 61 votes in the Senate today for ratification of a United Nations treaty on the rights of the disabled, which was modeled on a law passed by the Senate 22 years ago, the Americans with Disabilities Act. In effect, it was a vote to export American law to the 155 nations around the world that have signed this treaty, a treaty that has already been ratified by 126 of those countries, including the United Kingdom, France, Germany, China. Russia has ratified it. Now, you can pass anything in the Senate with 60 votes, except treaties, which require 66, a 2/3 majority. Every Democrat voted for the treaty, and only 8 Republicans voted for the treaty. 38 Republicans disgraced themselves and disgraced the Senate by voting against it and controlling the outcome.
Again, I will reiterate this: if the ADA solved this problem, if it's just modeled after the Americans with Disabilities Act, our ratification of it would just be rah-rah, sis-boom-bah. It wouldn't mean anything unless you're trying to lead by example, and we can't force other nations to ratify it. So that argument really isn't getting any traction. That's a dog that won't hunt, McStupid.
Treaties take years to negotiate before they come to a vote. This treaty, though signed by President Obama, was actually negotiated by President George W. Bush. But that wasn't good enough for 38 Republicans. Republicans made up transparently ridiculous reasons to vote against it. They said it threatened America's sovereignty, even though Senator Kerry repeatedly showed them that the treaty requires no changes in U.S. law and that the treaty cannot be used as the basis for a lawsuit in U.S. courts. The opponents then said it was inappropriate to consider a treaty in a post-election lame duck session. Never mind that just since I've been watching the Senate, they've approved treaties 19 times during lame duck sessions.
McStupid, I think it's high time you and the retarded individuals in your little circle of friends realize that there's a lot of registered Republicans who don't like George W. Bush. So just because he negotiated it originally and was in favor of it doesn't mean it's right. Just because numerous treaties have been ratified in lame duck sessions before doesn't make it right. That's just for the sake of it. That's stupid. A Democrat House under Reagan twice voted to slash the top income tax rate massively from 70% to 28% eventually. You're in favor of tax cuts now, right? That legitimizes Bush's tax cuts because a Democrat House back in the 80s voted twice for that. So, again, double-edged sword, little feller. Quit getting your arguments from idiots. Quit just cutting and pasting. Maybe read a book, learn something. Quit using these stupid arguments. In addition, McDummy, a Democrat Congress and Bill Clinton passed NAFTA. Granted, there were Republican votes in that, but it was a Democrat Congress. And Bill Clinton signed NAFTA. It was a Republican Congress that cut the capital gains tax, a massive cut in that, and Bill Clinton signed it. So I guess that means you're in favor of free trade and lower capital gains rate, right, little feller?
It's because this week the United States Senate had been considering a treaty modeled on the Americans with Disabilities Act to persuade other countries around the world to do what we have done, to treat our law like the gold standard for all countries, to which all countries should aspire. It's kind of flattering, right? I mean, our civil rights advance, one that was hard fought, but won. Our civil rights advance, a model for the world. So far, this treaty has been signed by 154 countries, including the U.S. It's been ratified by another 126 nations, not including the U.S. President Obama, in other words, signed it a couple years ago, but it has not yet been ratified by the United States Senate. To be clear, this UN treaty would not require anything from us at all. We already have disability rights and a legal framework for enforcing those rights. This treaty just pushes other countries to do what we have done. By ratifying that treaty, we would commit on an international level to what we already believe in here. Ratifying that treaty would help us lead the rest of the world to catch up to that historic leap that we took as a country back when President Bush I signed that landmark legislation. And with the exception of a nutso black helicopter conspiracy theory on the right, championed by failed presidential candidate and failed Senator Rick Santorum, who I should mention is now a columnist at a white secessionist birther website. That's his job now. Except for his nutso black helicopter conspiracy theories, ratifying this treaty was sort of a political no-brainer. I mean, this treaty has bipartisan support and not the usual token bipartisan support. I mean, this has the real thing, real bipartisan support from leading Democrats and leading Republicans. This treaty has vocal support from veterans. So many of them return from war with disabilities sustained in the service of their country. Veterans are as potent a constituency as you will find in American politics today on both sides of the aisle. Decorated
More of the same crap. So many countries have already ratified this. Obviously, our failure to ratify hasn't made much of a difference. Even Russia and China did it before us. And again, if it doesn't change U.S. law, then it would be just a rah-rah resolution. It would be superfluous. Or as Obama says, superfluous, or whatever, however he butchered that word. So again, just the same arguments over and over again that don't mean much. Let's get to some more here where we're going to go over it does, in fact, it will cost a lot, and it does, in fact, change, will require changes in U.S. law. So if you're a globalist, this treaty is for you. And Bush was a globalist. He also favored ratification of the Law of the Sea Treaty as well, which is another issue. So President Bush being in the camp for ratification of this treaty, and Dick Lugar, who is one of the more useless Republicans and most of them are useless. Him being in favor of it doesn't really faze me or surprise me. So let's get down to brass tacks on these other issues. As per usual, all the relevant links will be underneath the video. Libertarians, along with all those concerned with the autonomy of the institutions of private civil life, please note, and these are people who actually read this treaty, and I'll have the screenshots up, of the treaty language itself. McStupid did not read the treaty. Under Article 4, Section 1, Part E, states must take all appropriate measures to eliminate discrimination on the basis of disability by any person, organization, or private enterprise. Yes, any. A lot of ambiguity there, which could lead to a lot of problems. The employment provisions of the current federal ADA apply to employers with more than 15 employees. But Article 27(1)A would seem to prescribe doing away with any such threshold. And McStupid, that would be a change in U.S. law, dummy. Are you listening? It requires states to prohibit discrimination on the basis of disability with regard to all matters concerning all forms of employment. And again, I've read this treaty, McStupid hasn't. There's Article 4, Section E. I've got the screenshot of that up there, the very language from that treaty. This is the next one you'll be seeing, Part E, from the preamble, recognizing that disability is an evolving concept, and I'll be going over this later. This is part and parcel of numerous problems we've had with the Americans with Disabilities Act, and I will demonstrate that it is way out of control. This evolving concept has turned the ADA into a litigation machine, a shakedown machine for trial lawyers, and I will provide evidence of this. And a lot of this lawsuit, this is out of control. It's insanity. So, do you have a propensity for fits of rage? That might be a disability. Article 27, Section A, prohibit discrimination on the basis of disability, etc. All that information in there that I've already gone over. New government spending programs going beyond anything presently in federal law? Yes. For example, one provision requires ratifying states to ensure access to affordable, that's code language for price controls or direct subsidies, access to affordable personal mobility technologies, another new right not embodied in present federal law, that persons with disabilities have access to a range of in-home, residential, and other community support services, including personal assistance necessary to support living and inclusion in the community. How much might all this cost? And then we have another section that says, another provision explains that with regard to economic, social, and cultural rights, each state party undertakes to take measures to the maximum of its available resources. That's going to mean a lot of money. And where needed within the framework of international cooperation with a view to achieving progressively the full realization of these rights. Ironically, there was a hiking lodge that you could only accessible by hiking to it, actually got sued because it was not handicap accessible. Article 30, Section C, to ensure that persons with disabilities have access to sporting. Have they heard of the Special Olympics? How is a person in a wheelchair going to play football? I'm just asking. How about volleyball? So how far is this going to go? How crazy, how insane is this going to get before somebody says, whoa? Persons with Article 19, Section B, persons with disabilities have access to a range of in-home, residential, and other community support services. How much is that? That's not going to cost a single cent, McStupid. You haven't read it. Article 4, Section 2, with regard to economic, social, and cultural rights, each state party, that means the government, that means people who actually pay taxes, like myself, undertakes to take measures to the maximum of its available resources. And you know the way government spends, as far as I can see with them, they think money is infinite. I mean, they've got money hand over fist. They don't care. They'll continue to spend regardless of the costs. McStupid, you have to be the biggest dumbass on the planet to be in favor of this. The disabled have equal access to bank loans. Does that mean, what does that mean? Someone with absolutely no income whatsoever. Is a bank going to be forced to give them a $100,000 loan? I'm asking. Where does it say this can't be done? What lawyer is going to use ambiguity in this to shake people down? Whose expense? I already went over the sporting and recreational activities. Section 25E, a new right of disabled persons not to be discriminated against in the provision of life insurance. Under the existing federal ADA, terminal illnesses ordinarily count as disabilities. What does it mean for a terminally ill person not to be discriminated against in the provision of life insurance? Okay, can I get life insurance if somebody's terminally ill with cancer? Is somebody going to be forced? Is some company going to be forced to grant them life insurance? Are we going to have people with FICO scores of sub 700 with no income whatsoever? Are they going to get loans? And if you require a cosigner, is that discriminatory? If the bank says no, because we know you're not going to pay it back, are they discriminating? Provision of health insurance. Well, this sounds like Obamacare. Is this going to be guaranteed issued where somebody can wait till they need a major operation? Oh, yeah, well, I'm disabled because of this affliction. Now give me health insurance, and you have to pay for it. Can I get homeowners insurance after my house catches fire? I'm just curious. How about while it's on fire, before it totally burns down? Can I get house insurance then, home insurance? So our conclusion here, McStupid did repeat canned talking points. It is false, absolutely, completely false that this treaty would not require the U.S. to change its laws. That's a line of BS. And the New York Times claiming it would not be binding on state or federal governments is baloney. 36 senators pointed out in a letter criticizing the treaty, the U.S. Constitution's Article 6, Section 2, that's something you need to read too, McStupid, establishes treaties that receive the advice and consent of the Senate as supreme law of the land. So, your talking points are BS, McStupid. Now I'm going to get to another part of this. We're going to go through this quickly. See the video on your screen right now. I did a previous article on this, a previous video on this, where Rand Paul got in trouble for he dared criticize the Americans with Disabilities Act. And if you criticize it, you hate disabled people and want them to die. Emotional appeals abound and ridiculous arguments. And we're going to add to that now. I'll go through that really quickly. Hotel chain settles $20,000 fine for alleged ADA violation overseeing iDog. The problem with this, this man apparently called ahead of time and said he would be arriving with a service dog. The lady at the desk, or the desk clerk, calling 911, that was out of line. You didn't need to do that. That made this much worse. But it ended up being a shakedown because what about the right of refusal? I'm not saying that is the right thing in this case, but what about the right of refusal? Do you own your business? Okay? Do you have to, if a black restaurant owner, would he be forced to cater a KKK event? Could he be sued for saying, I'm not catering this KKK brunch, this luncheon? would you guys go bonkers over that if he was forced? Well, of course you would. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do. I'm just saying, is there a right of refusal here? Well, that ended up, and the desk clerk made it worse. Then you have Ford's Real Hamburgers, which was already in California, which shut down, and they were already in dire straits because of the recession, but professional lawsuit filer, Scott N. Johnson, his lawsuit that would require them to be ADA compliant, well, that was the final nail in the coffin. Clint Eastwood, he's been shook down by the ADA. The Hollywood actor and filmmaker got interested in the phenomenon of lawsuit mills that exploit the ADA when he was hit with a complaint that some doors and bathrooms at his historic 32-room Mission Ranch Hotel and Restaurant in Carmel, California weren't accessible enough. They wanted $577,000 from him. It was a shakedown. Eastwood told the Wall Street Journal he isn't quarreling with the ADA itself, and the proposed legislation would only affect future cases and not the one against him, but, quote, I just think for the benefit of everybody they should cut this racket because there are morally corrupt people who are doing this. Yes, it's a shakedown. How about another one? A deal with Netflix getting sued because they want everything subtitled for the hearing impaired. The Caption Center at Boston public television station WGBH has subtitled thousands of films and TV shows, according to Larry Goldberg, WGBH's director of media access. Goldberg said it cost $400 to $800 to add captions to a movie from scratch. Some in the blind community believe all films should be accompanied by descriptive video, supplemental soundtracks that describe action on screen. Do you realize how much this would cost? And any smaller operations who aren't extremely large like Netflix and could absorb some of these, bye-bye smaller competition that may get bigger in the future. So that's going to be, that is absolutely ridiculous. It was the National Association of the Deaf versus Netflix, and if this gets through, we're going to see some major problems. Could YouTube be obligated to close caption videos on the site? This case seems to leave that door open. Could every website using Flash have to redesign their sites for browsers that read the screen? I'm not creative enough to think of all the implications, but I can assure you that the ADA plaintiffs' lawyers will have a long checklist of items worth suing over. Big companies, as I mentioned, may be able to afford the compliance and litigation costs, but the entry costs for new market participants could easily reach prohibitive levels. Of course, it definitely will. You've got various arguments against this. Websites are not places at all, except in a metaphorical sense. They are streams of information transmitted to users. So this ADA probably doesn't even have authority here, but look for it to be expanded to where it would have authority. As a general rule, any site on the web is accessible from any place else, which means the inaccessibility of any particular site is less likely to represent a significant practical reduction of the choice set of any individual disabled user. One common argument for imposing the ADA's universal obligations on physical businesses is that it may be unrealistic to expect the disabled in particular to simply go somewhere else if the nearest business can't accommodate their needs. That argument has less traction in a landscape without distances. But what if none or very few of the businesses in a particular sphere implement some particular desired accommodation? Online, that's much more likely to be evidence that it would be unduly costly or burdensome to do so, and therefore beyond ADA's requirements, because sites are typically competing for a national, if not global, pool of hearing and visually impaired customers. One can imagine the manager of the lone local theater deciding it's not worth even a relatively small investment to accommodate a handful of disabled potential patrons. It's much harder to believe that Netflix is just arbitrarily dragging its heels and making its offerings more appealing to such an enormous potential market. So you can see how this it has the possibility of going way out of control. Then we have the ruling of the ADA, all facilities, all pools were required to install permanent lifts in every public facility at a cost of at least $6,000 each by the end of May. They aren't going to enforce it. Maybe later it will, but you see how absurd this is. Locations with multiple pools will be required to install a lift for every single pool on their property, and then of course that will require an operator and a lifeguard on duty, at least for that, in addition to what you already have or maybe don't have. Water parks, how about a slide? How are you going to make a high-speed slide handicap accessible? Will that be required? Is some professional litigant going to push that button? Are they going to push that envelope? Then you have paruresis, urophobia, whatever you want to call it. And people, the International Paruresis Association has lobbied for 8 years for the government to require employers, prisons, the military, and schools to offer a testing method that does not require a urine sample. For the record, I'm against the war on drugs, but since it is the law, I'll just look at it that way for now. Under ADA protection, renal retentives may demand private accommodations in the workplace. Companies would have to comply unless they convince the potty police at the EEOC that doing so would constitute a business hardship. So, a social anxiety disorder, is that going to affect things? Are we going to have a special private room for people who can't pee if somebody else is maybe in the room, even with a partition or even in a stall? See how this has the possibility of becoming absolutely ridiculous. Concerning people having to disclose to their employers, especially if they operate heavy machinery, that they're taking medication that may affect their ability to perform their job. Common sense dictates that any medication that carries with it a warning that it may cause drowsiness, or that the patient should use caution if operating machinery may pose a risk in the workplace. In recent action that defies common sense, the EEOC has taken the position that such policies are unlawful under the ADA. The ADA prohibits an employer from conducting medical inquiries without a reason to do so. The EEOC required a manufacturing employer to abandon its policy of encouraging employees to inform supervisors if they are under the influence of narcotic painkillers such as Vicodin. So, in particular, it puts employers to a choice between waiting until there is an actual accident caused by an employee's nodding off or zoning out, thus at least providing objective evidence of risk, and the risk of a large judgment payable to an employee who has not yet gotten into accidents. And then a company paid $40,000 to settle a dispute. There we go. That's just the ADA's out of control. Signing this disability treaty would be putting it on steroids. Another EEOC power grab, to quote the Bureau of National Affairs: if an employer adopts a high school diploma requirement for a job and the requirement screens out an individual who's unable to graduate because of a learning disability that meets the ADA's definition of disability, the employer may not apply the standard unless it can demonstrate that a diploma requirement is job-related and consistent with business necessity. To satisfy the ADA, the employer must show that a job applicant with a disability, and apparently not having a high school diploma might be a disability now, show that a job applicant with a disability cannot perform the job's essential functions with or without a reasonable accommodation, even if he or she does not meet a standard that is job-related and consistent with business necessity. The Commission added, employers require high school diplomas as prerequisites for many jobs. How about the fact that you're not a finisher, you're a quitter? If you can't go out and get a high school diploma, most likely, not in all cases, most likely you're probably a lazy bum. Or go get your GED. And then, McStupid, you know a little bit about this. Janitor. Amy Alkin notes, I'd need that janitor to be able to read the back of bottles of chemicals. So, and a lot of people graduate from high school in this country as its education is deteriorated because of government intervention. I'm not sure how a lot of the people graduating high school could actually read the back of a bottle. Then you've got Old Dominion Freight Line. If you have a driver, they had a driver who admitted to them that he had a drinking problem. He was developing a drinking problem. Well, they didn't even say he was going to fire him. They didn't say, you're fired, you're done. They said, when you complete the program, you're not going to drive anymore, because if you do, somebody's going to sue our butts and the company's going to lose a lot of money. Well, the ADA and the EEOC stepped in, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, that Old Dominion's policy that bans any driver who self-reports alcohol abuse from ever driving again violates the ADA. So a guy who said, yeah, I got a drinking problem, let's say he goes through treatment, and then he drives again and kills somebody. If some lawyer finds out about that, they are going to get their butts sued and they're going to lose. So they're caught between, Old Dominion's caught between a rock and a hard place. They didn't even say the guy's fired. They said you're going to do something, but you're not going to be behind the wheel of a vehicle. Ridiculous. You see how that's out of control. Then we have a laundry list, courtesy of James J. McDonald Jr., a laundry list of stupid things that the ADA caused employers to be required to do. And then, yeah, like I said, this is going into the realm of insanity. A 911 operator who had a propensity to fall asleep. County custodian with borderline mental retardation who was twice criminally convicted of stealing items from offices she was cleaning. and a medical transcriptionist with obsessive compulsive disorder who repeatedly came to work late or not at all. So apparently that's a disorder. And then if you got bipolar, you know, this is going crazy. People with mood disorders getting on disability. Everybody's bipolar. Everybody's got some kind. I remember Rush Limbaugh had a PSA where when you find out you don't have an affliction, you take nothing at all. Well, there's very few people I think who would fall under that. And then yeah, so if you're bipolar, you got a disorder now too, and you're afforded some special status under this ridiculous nonsense. So that about does it there. I have all the links under there as per usual. As you can see, I think I've laid this out for you in great detail, and peruse those links at your leisure. The ADA is out of control. This treaty, I knocked down all of McStupid's arguments. It's going to cost us a lot. It would cost us a lot. It would change U.S. law. There would be plenty of strong arming. There's plenty of ambiguity in there. And it would just be the ADA on steroids, which is already out of control and ridiculous. That doesn't mean I hate disabled people, because I know that's going to... You hate disabled people. No, I don't. I hate the Americans with Disabilities Act because it's ridiculous. It's a big friend of trial lawyers. And those people, trial lawyers, are most of the time parasites, and especially the ones that are using the ADA in jackpot lawsuits. Have a nice day and don't thank me now.